How is it possible that a team that seemed completely lost just a few weeks ago ended up leaving Miami 2026 with two drivers absolutely surprised by the level of their own car? Because that's exactly what happened with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. What was supposed to be another weekend of survival for McLaren ended up becoming the moment that could completely change the championship. And the most shocking thing was not only the result, but the internal reactions within the team itself. Norris couldn't believe the pace the MCL40 had in the race. Piastri admitted that the car was radically transformed compared to the first dates of the year. And while Mercedes and Red Bull tried to understand what had just happened, McLaren left a very dangerous feeling in Miami for the entire grid. The woking giant woke up again. But here comes the most important thing. This performance didn't appear out of nowhere. Behind this explosion there are weeks of crisis, aggressive technical development, risky decisions and brutal pressure that even generated doubts within the team itself. Today we are going to analyze why Norris and Piastri ended up shocked after the 2026 Miami GP, what really changed at McLaren, how they managed to take such a wild leap in performance and why many within the paddock are already beginning to think that this may be the true beginning of a new war for the championship. The first sign that something completely different was happening in Miami appeared in the first rounds of the weekend. Both Norris and Piastri began to report sensations that McLaren had not experienced in the entire 2026 season. The car finally responded consistently in the fast areas, maintained stability in slow corners and, most importantly, stopped brutally punishing the tires after a few laps. It was as if suddenly the MCL40 had finally found its real identity. And inside the box the reaction was immediate. Engineers reviewing data over and over again trying to confirm that this was not an illusion caused by the conditions of the circuit. Because the further into the weekend, the clearer it became that McLaren had unlocked something huge. Lando Norris was probably the one who felt the impact of that transformation the most. After weeks of constantly fighting against an unpredictable car, Miami returned a feeling that had disappeared since the end of the previous season. Absolute confidence in the front axle. And for a driver like Norris, that completely changes everything. Suddenly I could attack corners without needing to constantly correct the steering, I could enter aggressively without fear of losing the rear, and I could handle long runs without destroying the front tire as was previously the case. The Brit began to realize during race simulations that the pace was much stronger than expected. But even so, not even he himself imagined to what extent McLaren was ahead of the rest in certain phases of the circuit. Oscar Piastri experienced something very similar, although perhaps even more shocking internally, because the Australian had been insisting for weeks that the car had hidden potential that they were not yet exploiting. And in Miami for the first time he felt like all those pieces were finally falling into place. The balance of the car allowed it to attack corner entrances much more without compromising traction on exit. Additionally, the new aerodynamic package brutally improved the car's overall efficiency in dirty air, something that had been a nightmare for McLaren during the first few races of the year. Piastri began to notice that he could follow cars closely without completely losing aerodynamic stability, and that in modern Formula One changes absolutely the entire strategic panorama of the race. The impressive thing is that the impact was not only reflected in subjective sensations. The numbers were beginning to scare the rest of the paddock. McLaren showed much more controlled degradation, better minimum speed in medium corners and an ability to maintain a constant pace lap after lap that they simply had not had before. And that's where the real shock began for both Norris and Piastri. Because it's one thing to feel improvements, and quite another to discover that you suddenly have a car capable of directly fighting everyone. Especially after weeks where even finishing on the podium seemed complicated. Sprint was the first big announcement. Saturday's double left several rival teams completely confused. But internally at McLaren there was still caution. Nobody wanted to fall into euphoria too soon. However, on Sunday he ended up confirming everything. As the race progressed and both drivers began to maintain a devastating pace, Norris and Piastri understood that this was no longer a simple circumstantial improvement. The car had really taken a huge leap. And that produced a very strong reaction emotionally within the team. Because for weeks McLaren had lived with criticism, doubts and media pressure around the supposed initial failure of the MCL40. It was even questioned whether they had taken the car's aggressive concept too far. But Miami suddenly gave them the validation they needed. Norris ended up shocked by the difference in behavior compared to the first races of the year. And Piastri began to transmit a much more aggressive confidence for the rest of the season. Both understood exactly the same message. If McLaren continued to develop this platform correctly, they could once again become the absolute reference in Formula One. And this is where the real concern begins for the rest of the teams. Because what happened in Miami was not just a specific improvement in performance. It was proof that McLaren had finally understood how to unlock the MCL40's true potential. And when a team that had already dominated part of previous seasons manages to solve these types of problems, subsequent growth is usually extremely dangerous. Especially since Norris and Piastri were now no longer driving with doubts. They were driving believing again that they could win. And in Formula One, when the drivers regain that level of complete confidence in the car, that is often where the truly dominant seasons begin. But the most dangerous of all for the grid was not only the result in Miami, it was the emotional reaction that Norris and Piastri left after getting out of the car. Because for the first time in the entire 2026 season, both drivers began to speak with a completely different confidence. They no longer conveyed frustration, uncertainty, or extreme caution. What began to appear was conviction. And that radically changes the landscape within a Formula One championship. Because when a driver feels that the car finally responds exactly as he imagines, the level of aggressiveness, confidence, and consistency automatically skyrockets. And that was exactly what McLaren unleashed in Miami. Lando Norris finished the weekend with a very different feeling than the one he had during the first races of the year. 4 weeks he had been forced to drive trying to survive the car's problems, constantly managing balance limitations and adapting to unpredictable behavior. But in Miami he once again felt connected to the car. And that was even noticeable in the way he attacked each sector. The aggressive, precise, and extremely fluid Norris was back. The most impressive thing is that internally he began to perceive something even more important. McLaren had not only found performance, it had also found development direction. And in such a long season, that can make the difference between fighting for a few wins or building a real championship bid. Oscar Piastri, for his part, came out even more mentally strengthened. Because Miami confirmed something that it had been defending internally for a long time. The potential of the MCL40 was much greater than what the initial results reflected. And now that the car was beginning to stabilize, the Australian began to show a much more dangerous version of himself. More aggressive in qualifying. More comfortable managing tires. More confident in wheel-to-wheel fights. And above all, much more convinced that he could fight directly against Norris within the team itself. Because that also started to change after Miami. It was no longer just a matter of McLaren becoming competitive again, but rather that both drivers were beginning to see themselves as real candidates to constantly win races. And here appears a very important detail that could define the rest of the season. Miami left an extremely unsettling feeling for rivals. McLaren still does not seem to have reached the limit of this aerodynamic package. That is probably the part that worries the most within the paddock. Because the performance jump was so big that several teams immediately began to analyze whether McLaren had found a much wider development window than the rest. Especially since the car's behavior improved in practically all critical areas at the same time. Degradation, stability, traction, efficiency in dirty air, and cornering speed. Normally when a team improves so much at once, some new weak point usually appears. But in Miami, McLaren seemed to have eliminated several of its limitations simultaneously. And that inevitably began to draw comparisons with what happened in 2024, when the Woking team began a recovery that ended up making them Constructors' champions. That season also began with doubts, criticism, and a car that was difficult to understand. But when they found the right development path after Miami, McLaren transformed into a completely different machine. And now many within the paddock are beginning to wonder if we are seeing exactly the same pattern again. The difference is that in 2026 both Norris and Piastri seem much more mentally prepared to withstand the pressure of a constant fight at the top. They both have more experience, more confidence, and a much deeper understanding of the team and the car. That makes this threat much more serious for Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes. Because in the end, what was truly impressive about Miami was not simply the sprint double or the podiums on Sunday. What was really important was that Norris and Piastri recovered something that can completely alter a Formula One season. The absolute belief that they have a car capable of dominating. And when a team with McLaren's technical ability unlocks that mentality within its drivers, the rest of the championship begins to change immediately. Now the big question is no longer whether McLaren can win races. The real question is much more dangerous for everyone else. Who is going to be able to stop them if this MCL40 continues to evolve at the pace it showed in Miami? Norris felt connected to the car again in a way that had not happened in a long time. Piastri confirmed that the potential he sensed from within really existed. And perhaps most important of all, McLaren demonstrated that it still has a brutal technical reaction capacity when it finds the right direction of development. Because the leap they made in Miami was not small. It was a direct hit on the championship table. One that immediately forced Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes to look towards woking again with real concern. Right now no one can say for sure if this will be the start of a new dominance for McLaren or simply the perfect circuit for their aerodynamic package. But what was clear in Miami is that something completely changed within the team. Norris and Piastri's energy, confidence and mentality are no longer the same. And in Formula One, when a fast team regains the total trust of its drivers, that is usually where the seasons that end up marking an era begin. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.